I never told my daughter what I really kept inside Warehouse 42. When she married a slick, fast-talking gold digger who thought he could outsmart a retired old man, I made sure he would never find the key. But while I was sitting comfortably at home nursing a glass of bourbon, my warehouse manager called me in a dead panic. "Sir, your son-in-law is here. He has bolt cutters and he brought 2 armed men." I did not panic. I had been waiting for this exact moment. And what I did next brought his entire fake world crashing down. If you are connecting with my story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss my upcoming life stories. Tell me in the comments where you are watching this video from and what time it is there right now. It makes me really happy to know which corner of the country or the world is listening to me and what time of day it is for you. It was exactly 11:30 at night. The rain was coming down hard, beating violently against the thick glass windows of my home in the Pittsburgh suburbs. I am Harrison Caldwell. I am 70 years old, and I spent my entire life building an industrial salvage empire from rust, sweat, and scrap metal. People look at me now and see a quiet, retired widower. They see a man who tends to his garden and drinks his evening bourbon in peace. They do not see the man who survived 30 years in the cutthroat steel and salvage industry. I had just poured myself a generous measure of that bourbon, the good stuff I save for special occasions, when my burner phone buzzed. It vibrated heavily against the mahogany desk. Very few people have that number. One of them is Hector Morales, a 65-year-old military veteran who has managed my properties with absolute loyalty for 2 decades. I picked it up. Hector did not bother with greetings. His voice was a harsh, raspy whisper barely rising above the sound of the torrential rain on his end. "Mr. Caldwell, it is happening. Derek is at gate 4. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, feeling the familiar burn of the alcohol slide down my throat. "Is he alone, Hector?" "No, sir." Hector replied, his breath hitching slightly. "He has bolt cutters. And he brought company. 2 large men. They are armed. I can see the glint of handguns tucked into their waistbands." "What are your orders? Do I engage? Do I trigger the silent alarms?" I stood up from my leather chair and walked over to my desk. I picked up my iPad, my fingers tapping the screen to bring up the hidden high-definition surveillance feed I had secretly installed weeks ago. The screen flickered to life, cutting through the darkness with crisp night vision. There he was, my son-in-law, Derek Thorne, the self-proclaimed venture capitalist, the man who wore suits that cost more than my first car, standing in the freezing mud of an industrial district, gripping a pair of heavy iron bolt cutters. I watched the rain plaster his perfectly styled hair to his forehead. I saw the desperate, greedy twitch in his jaw. "No, Hector," I said, my voice dead calm. "Do not engage. Do not call the police. I want you to pull all the perimeter guards back. Open the outer blind spots. Give him a clear path to the main loading dock." Hector hesitated for only a fraction of a second. He knew me too well to question my sanity. "Are you absolutely sure, sir? Those men with him look like serious trouble." "I am entirely sure," I replied, resting my hand on a framed photograph of my late wife, Patty. "Let him cut the lock, Hector. Let him walk right in. Tonight he digs his own grave, and I want to watch him jump inside." I hung up the phone and set it down. On the screen, Derek was struggling with the heavy chain securing the outer chain-link fence. He looked pathetic, a rat trying to gnaw its way into a steel trap. He had no idea what was waiting for him from inside that rusted, dilapidated warehouse. He thought he was about to secure his financial freedom. He thought he had outsmarted a clueless old boomer. As I watched him finally snap the first lock, a cold, hard knot of anger tightened in my chest. To understand how we ended up here with my daughter's husband, committing a major felony in the dead of night, you have to go back exactly 3 months. You have to go back to the exact moment the seed of doubt was planted, the moment I realized a parasite had attached itself to my family. It was Brooke and Derek's 2nd wedding anniversary. Brooke is my 32-year-old daughter. She is the light of my life, a sweet, trusting soul who runs her own boutique floral design shop. When Patty passed away, I made a silent vow at her graveside that I would protect our daughter from everything. From heartbreak, from failure, and most importantly, from greedy men who prey on kindness. Brooke had organized a celebratory dinner at a high-end steakhouse downtown. I arrived early wearing a simple but clean suit, happy just to see my daughter smile. Derek arrived 15 minutes late, loudly complaining to the valet, flashing his expensive watch, and acting like he owned the entire restaurant. He always rubbed me the wrong way. He talked too fast, promised too much, and always seemed to be looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important had walked into the room. We were halfway through our ribeyes when the conversation took a very strange turn. Brooke was talking about a new flower supplier she had found, but Derek was completely distracted. He kept tapping his fork against his water glass, his eyes darting toward me. "So Harrison," Derek said casually, leaning back in his chair and swirling his wine. "I was driving through the industrial park the other day, looking at some commercial real estate for a tech startup I am funding. I happened to pass by one of your old properties. Warehouse 42, I think it is called." I stopped chewing. I placed my fork down very slowly. I did not react outwardly, but internally every single alarm bell I possessed began to ring. I have never discussed my business assets with Derek. I have never mentioned Warehouse 42 to anyone, not even to Brooke. It was an old rusted facility sitting on a neglected patch of land. There was absolutely no reason for a venture capitalist to be driving through that specific rundown area, let alone pulling property records to know it belonged to me. "Is that so?" I asked, maintaining a perfectly neutral, slightly confused expression. "Just an old holding property. Nothing but dust and rusted pipes. Why do you ask?" Derek smiled. It was a slick, practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. "Just curious. It seems like prime real estate if you clear the junk out. A massive footprint. You know, holding on to dead weight like that is bad business, Harrison. Taxes, liabilities. Have you ever thought about liquidating it? I have some developers who would pay top dollar just for the land." I looked at my daughter. Brooke was blissfully unaware of the tension, sipping her champagne and smiling at her husband. She thought he was just being helpful. She thought he was the successful, wealthy investor he claimed to be. But my gut, the instinct honed by decades of dealing with scrap metal thieves, corrupt contractors, and greedy businessmen, told me otherwise. Why would a man who supposedly manages tens of millions in venture capital care about an abandoned warehouse in the Rust Belt? Why was he digging into my private holdings, and why, despite his expensive suits, did his eyes look so desperately hungry? I picked up my napkin and wiped my mouth. I let a slow, harmless, grandfatherly smile spread across my face, the kind of smile that makes a predator think his prey is completely blind. "Well, Derek," I said, keeping my voice light and slightly raspy, "I am just a retired old man. Real estate markets and developer portfolios are a bit over my head these days. I just let it sit there. It is not hurting anyone." I saw a brief, sharp flash of satisfaction in Derek's eyes. He thought I was weak. He thought I was ignorant. He thought he had just found a gold mine guarded by a senile old fool. But as I sat there in the restaurant, matching his fake smile with my own, I knew one thing for certain. My daughter was married to a fraud. I did not know what his angle was yet, or how deep his lies went. But I was going to find out. I was going to tear his entire facade apart piece by piece until the ugly truth was exposed for Brooke to see. I paid the bill that night without batting an eye. When the waiter brought the leather folder, Derek did not even make the polite customary gesture of reaching for his wallet. He simply leaned back, patted his stomach, and praised the quality of the Wagyu beef. I handed over my credit card, with a warm smile playing the role of the generous, satisfied father perfectly. But beneath the table, my hands were clenched into tight fists. My knuckles, permanently scarred from decades of pulling jagged steel apart, throbbed with a dull ache. The ride home was quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Pittsburgh slick and reflective under the amber glow of the streetlights. Driving my old reliable truck through the city, my mind drifted back to the early days. It is funny how people like Derek look at me now. They see an old man in a flannel shirt and assume my life was as simple as my wardrobe. They have no idea what it took to build a salvage empire from absolute zero. When Patty and I first married, we had nothing but a rusted pickup truck and a mountain of debt. I spent 14 hours a day in the salvage yards. I breathed in the smell of burning copper, diesel fuel, and damp earth until it seeped into my very pores. I tore apart condemned factories, stripped copper wiring from abandoned mills, and hauled scrap iron until my back felt like it was breaking in two. I did it all for them. Patty would come down to the yard at 7 in the evening, carrying a thermos of black coffee and 2 sandwiches wrapped in foil. We would sit on the tailgate of that old truck covered in grime and talk about the future we were building for Brooke. I promised Patty on her deathbed that I would never let anyone take what we had built for our little girl. I intended to keep that promise. Men like Derek Thorne despise the dirt. They recoil at the smell of sweat and grease. Yet they are the first to show up with their manicured hands extended, desperate to claim the money that the dirt produced. He thought I was just an old fool hoarding useless industrial lots. He did not realize that in my line of work, you learn how to spot a piece of worthless scrap disguised as something shiny. I barely slept that night. I sat in my study, the only room in my house that still smells faintly of the old salvage days, and stared at the dark oak walls. Why did he ask about that specific warehouse? The holding company that owns it is buried under layers of legal protection. Someone would have to be actively hunting for my assets to trace that property back to me. The answer came knocking on my front door the very next morning at exactly 9 o'clock. I was in the kitchen brewing a pot of dark roast coffee when the doorbell chimed. When I opened the door, I found Derek standing on the porch. He was wearing a sharp-tailored navy suit holding an expensive leather briefcase. Brooke was standing right beside him, holding his arm, looking up at him with a gaze so full of blind admiration it made my stomach turn. "Good morning, Harrison," Derek said, flashing that identical bright, empty smile from the restaurant. "I hope we are not interrupting your morning routine." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and ushered them inside. "Not at all," I said, keeping my voice gentle and welcoming. "I was just making coffee." "What brings you two out so early on a Saturday?" Brooke kissed my cheek. "Derek was up half the night working, Dad," she said, her voice brimming with pride. "He wanted to show you something important." I led them into the living room and offered them a seat. Derek unzipped his briefcase with practiced efficiency. He pulled out a thick, glossy financial portfolio bound in a professional folder and slid it across the coffee table toward me. It looked like the kind of presentation you give to a board of directors, not your retired father-in-law on a Saturday morning. "Harrison, I know we briefly touched on this last night." Derek began, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees to appear earnest and sincere. "But I could not stop thinking about your portfolio. I did some deep diving into the county property records. I hope you do not mind. I just want to look out for the family." I picked up the folder. The first page showed an aerial map of the industrial district, with my property outlined in bright red ink. Next to it was a breakdown of estimated property taxes and maintenance liabilities. "You are bleeding money on a dead asset, Harrison." Derek continued, his voice dropping into a tone of faux concern. "That warehouse is sitting on prime commercial land, but the structure itself is a liability. You are paying commercial taxes on an empty shell. As a venture capitalist, it hurts me to see capital tied up like that. You are 70 years old. You should be enjoying your twilight years, not paying taxes on rusted metal." I flipped through these pages slowly, pretending to be overwhelmed by the numbers and the pie charts. He had done his homework, I will give him that. But his math was entirely based on public tax records. He had no idea what was actually going on behind those rusted doors. "I have developers in my network right now." Derek said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that bordered on predatory. "They are looking for industrial footprints in that exact zip code. I can broker a private sale. I can get that dead weight off your hands by the end of the month, and put a massive liquid cash injection directly into your retirement account. You would not have to lift a finger. I will handle all the paperwork." I looked over at Brooke. She squeezed his hand, nodding eagerly. "Dad, you have to admit he is making total sense," she said softly. "You have worked so hard your entire life. You do not need the stress of managing abandoned properties. Derek is a financial genius. He knows exactly how to handle these corporate sales. Let him help you." The rage flared up inside me again, hot and sharp. My sweet, trusting daughter was sitting in my living room actively helping a parasite try to drain my assets. He had completely brainwashed her. He had convinced her that he was our financial savior, a wealthy expert gracing us with his brilliant business acumen. I wanted to grab him by the collar of his tailored suit and throw him out onto the street. I wanted to demand exactly how much debt he was hiding behind those expensive clothes. Instead, I forced my shoulders to drop. I let out a long, heavy sigh, acting exactly like the tired, confused old man he needed me to be. "Well, Derek," I said, tapping my calloused finger against his glossy report, "this is an awful lot to take in. I am just not used to moving this fast. My accountant usually handles these tax forms, and I am not too great with all this modern financial jargon." Derek smiled, a look of distinct triumph flashing across his face. "You do not have to understand all the jargon, Harrison. That is what I am here for. I can draw up the power of attorney documents this afternoon. Just a limited proxy so I can negotiate with the buyers on your behalf." I shook my head slowly, handing the folder back to him. "I appreciate the hard work, son. I really do. But I am old-fashioned. I never sign anything the same day I read it. Leave the proposal with me. Let me read through it this week with a magnifying glass and a cup of tea. We can talk about it again next weekend." Derek's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His jaw tightened. The impatience leaked out just enough for me to catch it. He needed that money fast. The urgency was palpable. "Of course, Harrison." He recovered quickly, packing the documents away. "Take your time. Just know that real estate markets fluctuate. These buyers will not wait around forever." As I walked them to the door, I noticed Derek pause by the entrance to my private study. His eyes darted past the open door, landing squarely on the heavy vintage steel safe bolted to the corner of the room. He stared at it for only 2 seconds, but 2 seconds was all I needed to confirm my suspicions. He was not just going to wait for me to sign his papers. He was looking for another way in. The hunt had officially begun, and I was more than ready to play the game. The morning sun crawled across the hardwood floors of my study, illuminating the heavy steel door of my vintage safe. I had been sitting in my leather armchair since dawn, staring at that combination dial, replaying the hungry look in Derek's eyes from the night before. Men like him cannot hide their greed. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. The house was completely silent, exactly the way Patty and I used to enjoy our Sunday mornings. I was just about to head out to the garden to clear my head when the sharp chime of the front doorbell shattered the quiet. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was barely 8:30. Nobody drops by unannounced at this hour unless there is an emergency or they are selling something. I tightened my robe and walked to the foyer. Looking through the peephole, I saw my daughter Brooke and her husband standing on the porch. Derek looked like he had just stepped out of a financial magazine, wearing a crisp tailored suit despite it being a Sunday morning. He was clutching a thick, leather-bound portfolio tightly against his chest. Brooke looked tired, holding a cardboard tray of coffees, but she wore a strained smile. I unlocked the heavy door and pulled it open, pasting a look of pleasant surprise onto my face. "Brooke, sweetheart, what a surprise." I stepped aside to let them in. "You should have called. I would have put some breakfast together." "We brought pastries, Dad," Brooke said, kissing my cheek as she walked past me into the kitchen. "We know it is early, but Derek was up practically all night working on something for you. He was so excited he could not even wait for Monday." I turned to look at Derek. He stood in my foyer, radiating a false, energetic warmth. "Good morning, Harrison." he said, extending his hand. I am sorry for the ambush, but when an opportunity strikes, you have to grab it. I shook his soft manicured hand, feeling the stark contrast against my own calloused palms. I led him into the living room, gesturing toward the sofa. Derek sat down, placing his leather portfolio on the coffee table with a heavy thud. He unzipped it with practiced efficiency, pulling out a stack of high-gloss, professionally bound documents. He spread them out across the glass surface. I sat across from him, resting my hands on my knees, playing the part of the confused, aging father perfectly. Harrison, I know we briefly touched on this at dinner last night. Derek began, leaning forward to appear earnest and sincere. But I could not stop thinking about your holding properties. I did a deep dive into the county tax records. I hope you do not mind. I just want to look out for the family's future. I picked up the first folder. The cover page showed an aerial map of the industrial district with Warehouse 42 outlined in bright red ink. Next to it was a detailed breakdown of estimated property taxes, maintenance liabilities, and projected losses. You are bleeding money on a dead asset, Harrison. Derek continued, his voice dropping into a tone of deep, artificial concern. That warehouse is sitting on prime commercial land, but the structure itself is a massive liability. You are paying high commercial taxes on an empty shell. As a venture capitalist, it physically hurts me to see capital tied up like that. You are 70 years old. You should be enjoying your twilight years traveling, relaxing, not paying taxes on rusted metal and contaminated soil. I flipped through the pages slowly, pretending to be overwhelmed by the numbers and the colorful pie charts. He had certainly done his homework, but his math was entirely based on public tax records. He had absolutely no idea what was actually going on behind those rusted doors. I have developers in my private network right now. Derek said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that bordered on predatory. They are looking for industrial footprints in that exact zip code. I can broker a private sale. I can get that dead weight off your hands by the end of the month and put a massive liquid cash injection directly into your retirement account. You would not have to lift a single finger. I will handle all the paperwork, the lawyers, the negotiations. Everything. Brooke walked into the living room, setting down a tray with the coffees and pastries. She sat next to Derek, wrapping her arm around his and looking at me with an expression that made my stomach churn. Dad, you have to admit he is making total sense, Brooke said softly, though there was a distinct edge to her voice. You have worked so hard your entire life. You do not need the stress of managing abandoned properties. You are not a young man anymore. Derek is a financial genius. He knows exactly how to handle these corporate sales. Let him help you. The passive-aggressive sting of her words hit me hard. She was looking at me like I was a relic, an old pack rat clinging to trash. You need to let go of the past, Dad. She continued, her tone patronizing. Those scrapyards, those dirty old warehouses, they belong to a different lifetime. You promised Mom you would take care of yourself. Let Derek handle this. It is what he does best. The rage flared up inside me again, hot and sharp. My sweet, trusting daughter was sitting in my living room, actively helping a parasite try to drain my assets. He had completely brainwashed her. He had convinced her that he was our financial savior, a wealthy expert gracing us with his brilliant business acumen. I wanted to grab him by the collar of his tailored suit and throw him out onto the street. I wanted to demand exactly how much debt he was hiding behind those expensive clothes, but I forced my shoulders to drop. I let out a long, heavy sigh, acting exactly like the tired, confused old man he needed me to be. Well, Derek, this is an awful lot to take in, I said, tapping my finger against his glossy report. I am just not used to moving this fast. My accountant usually handles these tax forms, and I am not too great with all this modern financial jargon. Derek smiled, a look of distinct triumph flashing across his face. You do not have to understand all the jargon, Harrison. That is what I am here for. I can draw up the limited proxy documents this afternoon. Just a signature so I can negotiate with the buyers on your behalf. I shook my head, slowly gathering the folders. I appreciate the hard work, son. I really do. But I never sign anything the same day I read it. Leave the proposal with me. Let me read through it. Derek's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his fake smile plastered on. Of course, Harrison. Take your time. Just remember, these buyers will not wait forever. The market is moving fast. I understand. I watched through this front window as Derek guided Brooke down the porch steps. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture that probably looked like loving devotion to anyone else. But to me it looked exactly like a handler steering his mark. They climbed into his leased sports car, a vehicle I now suspected he could not actually afford, and pulled out of the driveway. The sound of the engine faded down the quiet suburban street, leaving me alone with the heavy, stifling silence of the empty house. I stood there for a long time, feeling a cold, bitter wave of disrespect wash over me. It was not just the arrogance of his financial presentation, or the slick, practiced way he tried to manipulate me into signing away a property I had bled for. It was the sheer audacity of coming into my home, eating the pastries my daughter bought, and looking at me as if I were nothing more than a decaying obstacle standing between him and a payday. He looked at me the way a vulture looks at a dying animal. I walked slowly back into the living room and picked up the glossy financial portfolio he had left on the coffee table. I tossed it into the trash can without a second thought. I did not need to read his fabricated numbers. I already knew exactly what he was trying to do. I made my way down this hallway to my private study, the room Derek had been eyeing just moments before. I closed the door behind me and walked over to the vintage steel safe bolted to the corner of the floor. It was a massive, heavy piece of iron manufactured back in the 1950s. The combination dial was worn smooth from decades of use. I ran my calloused hand over the cold metal, feeling the familiar, reassuring weight of it. This safe was a symbol of everything Patty and I had built. When we started the salvage business, we could not afford a proper banking setup. We kept our first earnings completely in cash, locked inside a small metal lockbox, hidden under our bed. As the business grew, so did the risks. I bought this safe after our first major contract, a demolition job that took 6 months to complete. I promised Patty on the day we bolted it to the floor that I would always fill it with enough security to make sure Brooke would never have to struggle the way we did. Patty was a fierce, perceptive woman. She could spot a liar from a mile away. If she were still here, she would have seen right through Derek's expensive suits and hollow charm on the very first day Brooke brought him home for dinner. But Patty was gone, and the responsibility to protect our daughter fell entirely on my shoulders. I looked at the framed photograph of Patty sitting on my desk. Her warm, knowing eyes seemed to pierce right through the glass. I will not let him break her, Patty. I whispered into the quiet room. I will not let him take a single dime of what we built. But I knew I had to be smart. If I simply called Brooke and told her that her husband was a scheming gold digger, she would defend him. Derek had spent 2 years building a narrative painting himself as the successful, caring partner. If I attacked him directly, I would become the villain. I would be the paranoid, controlling father trying to ruin her marriage. Derek would use my accusations to drive a wedge between us, isolating Brooke and making her even more dependent on him. I could not allow that to happen. I had to let Derek think he was winning. I had to let him believe his manipulation was working, that the clueless old man was slowly taking the bait. I needed to feed his greed until he became reckless enough to expose his true nature right in front of Brooke. I picked up my phone and dialed Hector Morales. The line rang twice before his gruff voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," Hector said. "Do we have a problem at the yard today?" "Not at the yard, Hector," I replied, sinking into my leather desk chair. "I need you to do something for me, and I need it done quietly. I want you to pull the original leasing deeds for Warehouse 42. Make high-quality copies of the cover pages, the ones showing my name as the sole proprietor, and the tax assessment values. But redact the leasing agreement with the Federal Transport Company. I do not want any mention of the armored vehicles or the security protocols. Make it look like a standard inactive holding property." Hector was silent for a moment. He was a smart man, a former military logistics officer, who never asked unnecessary questions unless he sensed danger. "Are we preparing for a sale, sir?" "No," I said, my voice hardening. "We are preparing a trap. I have a rat sniffing around the perimeter, and I need to lay out some cheese. Put the redacted copies in a standard manila folder and have one of the trusted drivers drop it off at my house this afternoon." "Understood, sir. It will be there by 3 o'clock. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, staring at the heavy steel safe. Derek wanted access to my holdings. He wanted to review the deeds. I was going to give him exactly what he asked for, but on my terms. I would invite him over next week under the guise of discussing his proposal. I would hand him the redacted deeds, letting him think he was one step closer to getting my signature. I would play the hesitant but agreeable father-in-law, asking naive questions about venture capital and real estate markets. But I knew Derek. Men driven by sudden, desperate greed do not have the patience for slow negotiations. His lingering look at my safe told me everything I needed to know. He was evaluating the security of my home. He was wondering what else I kept locked away. If he was willing to manipulate my daughter to steal a warehouse, he was certainly willing to break into my private study to find leverage or cash. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the meticulously manicured lawn. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with families enjoying their peaceful Sunday morning. They had no idea that a quiet war was brewing inside the walls of my home. I needed to prepare the battlefield. I spent the next 2 hours securing the study. I went online and ordered 3 high-definition, motion-activated hidden cameras. I chose models designed to look like ordinary objects: a digital clock, a smoke detector, and a charging brick. I paid for expedited shipping, ensuring they would arrive by Tuesday. I planned to position them to cover every angle of the room, with a direct line of sight, focusing squarely on the vintage safe. Next, I decided to modify the safe itself. It contained important documents, family heirlooms, and a significant amount of emergency cash. I could not leave those assets vulnerable. I emptied the contents into a heavy duffel bag, intending to move them to a secure bank vault first thing Monday morning. I left only a few stacks of bundled single-dollar bills disguised with $100 bills on the outside, a classic decoy tactic I learned during my early days in the rough industrial yards. I also left a very specific fabricated document inside. It was a fake inventory sheet printed on official-looking company letterhead. The document detailed a fictional stockpile of unregistered industrial platinum currently being housed at Warehouse 42. It noted the estimated value at $15 million and mentioned an impending quiet liquidation sale. It was the perfect bait, designed to appeal directly to a desperate man looking for a massive, untraceable payday. If Derek managed to crack the safe, he would not find my life savings. He would find a one-way ticket to a federal prison sentence. He would find the very thing that would seal his fate. I closed the heavy steel door of the safe, spinning the dial to lock the tumblers in place. The metallic click echoed in the quiet room, a satisfying sound of finality. The board was set. The pieces were moving into position. Derek thought he was the mastermind of this game, the brilliant venture capitalist outsmarting an outdated relic of the past. He was about to learn that you never step into a scrapyard unless you are fully prepared to get crushed by the machinery. I walked out of the study, locking the door firmly behind me. I went back to the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, and stepped out onto the back patio. The morning air was crisp and cool. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly begin to leave my shoulders. I had made a promise to Patty, and I was going to keep it. I was going to protect our daughter, and I was going to absolutely destroy the man who tried to use her against me. The hunt was on, and I was holding all the keys. I let 2 full weeks pass without giving Derek a single update. I ignored his subtle text messages, dodged his casual phone calls, and maintained the perfect illusion of an old man dragging his feet. I needed him to stew in his own anxiety. I needed the pressure on his end to build until it cracked his polished exterior. That crack finally appeared on a crisp Tuesday morning right in front of my daughter's flower shop. Brooke owned a beautiful little boutique in the historic district. She had poured her heart, her soul, and every ounce of her savings into that place. It always smelled of fresh eucalyptus, damp potting soil, and blooming lilies. I decided to drop by unannounced, bringing her favorite cinnamon scones from the bakery down the street. I parked my truck a block away and walked toward her storefront, enjoying the brisk morning air. But as I rounded the corner, the picturesque scene of her charming boutique was shattered by the harsh, grinding sound of heavy diesel machinery. A massive battered tow truck was backed aggressively into the loading zone right behind Brooke's shop. The hydraulic lift was already engaged, whining loudly as it hoisted the front tires of Brooke's custom-painted floral delivery van off the pavement. I quickened my pace, my heart giving a hard thump. Through the large glass windows of the boutique, I saw Brooke. She was standing on the sidewalk, wrapping her cardigan tightly around herself, her shoulders shaking. She was crying. A burly man in a high-visibility vest was standing next to the tow truck, holding a clipboard and looking completely unimpressed by her tears. I rushed forward, dropping the bakery box onto a nearby wrought iron bench. "Brooke, sweetheart, what is going on here?" I asked, wrapping a protective arm around her trembling shoulders. She looked up at me, her mascara slightly smudged beneath her eyes. "Dad, I do not understand." She sobbed, her voice cracking. "He says he is repossessing the van. He says we have missed 3 consecutive lease payments, but that is impossible. Derek handles all the business accounts. He set up the auto pay for the commercial vehicles months ago. There has to be some kind of terrible mistake." I turned my gaze to the man with the clipboard. He had the tired, cynical look of a guy who dealt with people's worst days for a living. I approached him, keeping my tone level but firm. "Excuse me, friend. I think there might be a clerical error here. My daughter owns this business. We can clear this up right now." The repo man did not even blink. "Look, buddy, I just get the work orders," he said, tapping his pen against the metal clip. "The leasing company issued the recovery order yesterday afternoon. 3 months delinquent. No response to the warning letters. The grace period is over. I am just here to collect the asset. You want to argue the numbers, call the bank." I reached into my breast pocket for my checkbook. I was fully prepared to write a check right there on the hood of his truck to stop my daughter from crying. But before my hand even unbuttoned my coat, the screech of tires echoed down the street. Derek's leased sports car swerved into the loading zone, mounting the curb aggressively before slamming to a halt. He threw his door open and sprinted toward us. He did not look like the confident, arrogant venture capitalist who had sat in my living room 2 weeks ago. He looked like a man running for his life. His normally immaculate hair was disheveled, plastered to his forehead with a sheen of cold sweat. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and his eyes were wild with a frantic, desperate energy. "Hey, stop right there. Drop that vehicle immediately," Derek shouted, waving his arms as he marched up to the repo man. "What the hell do you think you are doing? This is a massive banking error. You are stealing private property." The tow truck driver crossed his arms over his chest. "Save the performance, pal. The account is empty." The payments bounced. "I am hooking the rear axle and pulling out of here in 2 minutes." Derek pulled a sleek smartphone from his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it onto the concrete. He was dialing numbers with frantic, jerky motions. "Listen to me very closely," he growled, pacing back and forth in a tight, agitated circle. "My wealth management firm handles millions of dollars in liquid assets. My private bank flagged the auto draft as a fraudulent transaction because of a security update. It is a protective hold on the commercial account. That is all. I am transferring the funds from my personal portfolio right now." He shoved the phone against his ear, his jaw clamped so tight the muscles twitched. I watched him closely, letting my protective father persona mask the cold, calculating observation happening behind my eyes. I watched the heavy bead of sweat trace down the side of his neck. I watched the erratic, trembling rhythm of his hands. I saw the way his expensive leather shoes shifted restlessly against the pavement. Brooke stepped forward, reaching out to touch his arm. Derek, what is happening? Why would the bank freeze the account for 3 months without telling us? Derek flinched away from her touch, just for a fraction of a second, but I caught it. It was the physical reaction of a cornered animal. Do not worry about it, Brooke. He snapped, his voice much sharper than the gentle tone he usually reserved for her. I told you it is a technical glitch. The wire transfers got crossed between the offshore holding and the domestic branch. I am fixing it. Just let me work. He spent the next 10 minutes arguing furiously with someone on the phone. He paced down the alleyway, his voice hushed but frantic, making wild pleading gestures with his free hand. Finally, he marched back to the repo man, shoving the phone into the driver's face. The driver listened for a moment, let out a loud, heavy sigh, and handed the phone back. Fine, he muttered, looking at Derek with absolute disgust. The agency just confirmed a manual wire transfer. You bought yourself 30 days, buddy. But if that wire bounces back, I am coming straight to your driveway next time. With a loud hiss of releasing pressure, the hydraulic lift lowered Brooke's delivery van back onto the pavement. The tow truck detached its heavy steel hooks and rattled away down the street, leaving a thick cloud of diesel exhaust in its wake. Brooke let out a massive breath, leaning against the side of her van. Oh my God, she whispered, rubbing her temples. That was terrifying. Derek, are you sure everything is okay with the business account? Derek forced a laugh, running a trembling hand through his ruined hair. He pulled Brooke into a tight hug, kissing the top of her head. Everything is perfectly fine, babe. I promise. Just a stupid clerical error at the bank. You know how these massive institutions operate. The algorithms flag a large transfer, and suddenly everything freezes. I will have my assistant yell at our account manager this afternoon. Brooke smiled, leaning into his chest, entirely comforted by his words. But as Derek looked over her shoulder, his eyes met mine. For one brief, unguarded second, the mask slipped completely. I did not see a wealthy investor looking back at me. I saw pure, unadulterated terror. He quickly plastered his fake, arrogant smile back onto his face and clapped his hands together. Well, crisis averted, he declared, his voice pitching an octave too high. Harrison, good to see you. Sorry for the morning drama. Just the trials and tribulations of high-level corporate banking, right? Right, I replied smoothly, picking up the bakery box from the bench and handing it to Brooke. High-level corporate banking. I hugged my daughter, kissed her cheek, and told her I would call her later. I walked back to my truck, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I did not start the engine immediately. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Millionaire venture capitalists do not get their wives' delivery vans repossessed over a technical glitch. Men who manage vast portfolios of liquid assets do not shake uncontrollably while trying to wire a few $100s to a collections agency. They do not pace like desperate addicts in a back alley. They do not look at a tow truck driver with absolute pants-wetting terror as if their life is on the line. Derek Thorne was not experiencing a banking error. He was drowning. He was suffocating under a mountain of debt, scrambling to plug holes in a sinking ship. He had drained Brooke's commercial accounts dry, leaving her completely exposed, completely vulnerable, and totally unaware of the financial ruin creeping up on her. My gut feeling had evolved from a simple suspicion into a hard, undeniable fact. My son-in-law was a desperate, dangerous fraud, and he was currently bleeding my daughter's business to death to keep himself afloat. He needed a massive infusion of cash to save his own skin, which explained exactly why he was suddenly so interested in liquidating my industrial warehouse. He was hunting for a lifeline, and I was going to hand him an anvil. That Friday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brooke on my porch with an overnight bag, looking exhausted. Derek stood behind her, gripping a duffel, wearing a strained smile. They claimed a plumbing issue flooded their master bathroom and ruined the carpets in their townhouse. The property management company, Derek explained, needed the weekend to run industrial dehumidifiers. It sounded like a reasonable inconvenience, but I knew better. Millionaires do not pack their bags and flee to their father-in-law's guest room over a burst pipe. They check into a hotel downtown and let their insurance foot the bill. I smiled warmly, stepping aside, offering them the guest suite. I knew exactly why they were here. The plumbing issue was a fabricated excuse. Derek was running out of time. His creditors were circling, the repossession agency was breathing down his neck, and he needed unfettered access to my home. Having him sleep under my roof felt like inviting a venomous snake into my bed, but I played the gracious host. I cooked dinner, poured him a glass of scotch, and listened to him boast about phantom investment portfolios. Brooke leaned against his shoulder, blind to the frantic desperation radiating from him. By 10 o'clock, they excused themselves to bed. I waited until I heard the heavy oak door of the guest suite click shut. Then I retreated to my bedroom, leaving the door open just a crack. I did not sleep. I lay on top of my covers in the dark, fully clothed, listening to the ambient sounds of the house I had lived in for 3 decades. When you spend your life guarding scrapyards filled with valuable copper, you become a very light sleeper. You learn to differentiate between the harmless settling of a foundation and the deliberate footfalls of a trespasser. The house was silent for hours. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed midnight, then 1 o'clock. The neighborhood was dead to the world. And then at exactly 14 minutes past 2 in the morning, I heard it. It was a subtle, muffled groan of wood. The 4th floorboard in the upstairs hallway right outside the guest suite has a distinct squeak if you step squarely on its center. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress and stood up my bare feet, silent against the carpet. I did not turn on any lights. I moved through the shadows of my home with the practiced ease of a man who knows every angle of his territory. I crept down the stairs, my breathing slow and measured. The downstairs hallway was bathed in the pale glow of the moonlight, filtering through the high windows. I stopped at the bottom of the staircase, pressing my back against the cool plaster of the wall. Someone was moving around in my private study. The heavy mahogany door to the study was pushed open just a fraction of an inch. A thin beam of pale light sliced through the narrow gap, dancing across the hallway floor. I edged closer, leaning my head forward to peer through the crack. Derek was inside. He was dressed in dark sweatpants and a black t-shirt, holding a small penlight between his teeth. He was kneeling in front of my heavy fireproof filing cabinet, the one positioned directly beneath the framed photograph of Patty. He had bypassed the vintage steel safe in the corner. He must have realized during his first visit that he lacked the tools to crack a mechanical combination lock. Instead, he was focusing on the filing cabinet, utilizing a thin metal tension wrench and a lockpick to manipulate the simple cylinder lock holding the drawers shut. I watched him work. His breathing was heavy, ragged, echoing in the quiet room. His hands were shaking with a terrifying, unhinged urgency. He was not a professional thief. He was a desperate man, backed into a corner, completely devoid of morals or boundaries. The lock gave way with a soft, metallic click. Derek practically ripped the bottom drawer open. He began tearing through the hanging folders, tossing aside utility bills, property deeds, and old tax returns. He was hunting for something specific. He wanted liquid numbers. He wanted to know exactly what I was worth, and how quickly he could get his hands on it to pay off the monsters breathing down his neck. I let him search for another full minute, absorbing the sheer audacity of his betrayal. He was standing in the house my sweat had paid for, trying to steal the future I had secured for the woman sleeping upstairs. I stepped into the doorway, raised my hand, and firmly flicked the brass light switch on the wall. The study was instantly flooded with harsh, bright yellow light. Derek gasped a sharp, terrified sound and physically recoiled. He dropped the penlight onto the carpet and spun around, his eyes wide, his chest heaving. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice mild, almost groggy, as if I had just woken up from a deep slumber. "What on earth are you doing down here in the dark? Is everything all right with the guest room?" For 3 agonizing seconds, he stared at me, his mind clearly scrambling to process the situation and invent a plausible lie. Then the slick, manipulative con artist took over. He let out a breathless, forced chuckle, and ran a hand through his hair, leaning casually against the filing cabinet to block my view of the open drawer behind his legs. Harrison. He exhaled, placing a hand over his heart in a gesture of exaggerated relief. You scared the living daylights out of me. I am so sorry for sneaking around. I woke up with terrible heartburn. That spicy brisket we had for dinner really did a number on my stomach. I did not want to wake Brooke, so I came downstairs looking for the kitchen. I must have gotten turned around in the dark and wandered into your office. I was just trying to find a light switch. I smiled a gentle, accommodating smile that masked the absolute disgust boiling in my veins. Of course, son. I said, my tone dripping with fake sympathy. The kitchen is down the hall to the left. I keep a bottle of antacids in the pantry above the sink. Let me go grab them for you. I turned and walked to the kitchen, leaving him alone for just a few seconds. When I returned and handed him the chalky tablets, he thanked me profusely, wishing me a good night, before hurrying back upstairs. I waited until his footsteps faded completely. Then I walked back into my study. He had closed the cabinet drawer, but in his blind panic, he made a careless mistake. I pulled the drawer open and looked inside. The folder detailing my total net worth and liquid cash reserves was pulled halfway up, sticking out awkwardly from the rest of the meticulously organized files. He had found exactly what he was looking for right there in the quiet house. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen, casually flipping through the newspaper. Brooke came downstairs first, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and kissed my cheek. Derek followed shortly after, looking surprisingly refreshed for a man who had spent the early hours of the morning picking the lock on a filing cabinet. He greeted me with hollow enthusiasm, pouring cereal and chatting about the weather. I played the gracious host, offering a warm smile and asking if his heartburn had settled down. He assured me it had completely oblivious to what I actually knew. The hidden cameras had been discreetly installed while Brooke and Derek were running errands the previous afternoon. One was tucked inside a digital clock on the living room mantel, offering a sweeping view of the seating area. I knew how to rig a trap to catch a rat. Derek had taken the bait in the study, but a slightly displaced file folder was not enough to condemn him. If I brought it up to Brooke, he would simply spin a dozen believable lies. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed him caught in the act, captured on high-definition video, completely violating my trust. After breakfast, Brooke mentioned she needed a shower before a meeting. Derek said he was going to read in the living room. It was the perfect opportunity. I casually told them I was going for a walk. As I passed through the living room, I pulled my iPad from my briefcase. I unlocked the screen, leaving the auto lock disabled. I opened my email and pulled up a carefully fabricated message I had created the night prior. It looked like confidential correspondence from my wealth management bank. The subject read, "Urgent portfolio liquidation." The body detailed a fictional impending transfer of $7 million into a highly liquid checking account. It was the ultimate prize for a drowning man. I placed the unlocked iPad gently onto the center of the coffee table right next to Derek. I grabbed my walking stick, called out a cheerful goodbye to the empty hallway, and walked out the front door, pulling it shut with a loud, definitive click. I did not go for a walk. I walked 2 blocks down the street and slid into my truck. I pulled out my smartphone and immediately opened the secure application linked to my hidden cameras. The live feed buffered before snapping into crystal-clear, high-definition focus. I stared at the small screen, my breathing slow and steady, watching the silent movie play out inside my living room. For the first 2 minutes, Derek did nothing. He sat on the sofa holding a magazine, staring blankly. He was listening. He was waiting to ensure Brooke was upstairs and I was genuinely gone. The faint sound of the running shower provided the all-clear signal. He lowered the magazine. His head snapped toward the coffee table, his eyes locking onto the glowing screen of my iPad. He stared at it as if it were a pile of gold bullion. The internal debate lasted only a matter of seconds. The sheer intoxicating lure of the fabricated email was simply too strong for him to resist. He leaned forward, casting a quick, paranoid glance over his shoulder toward the staircase. Seeing nothing but empty space, he reached out and snatched the iPad right off the glass table. The camera feed captured his face with agonizing clarity. The polished mask of the successful venture capitalist vanished, replaced by the feral, hungry expression of a scavenger. His eyes darted across the screen, reading the fake email. I watched his jaw drop slightly. He practically vibrated with adrenaline. $7 million in liquid cash ready to be transferred. It was the exact lifeline he had been desperately hunting for. Derek did not just read the email. He immediately pulled his own sleek smartphone from his pocket. His hands were shaking so violently, he had to rest his elbows on his knees to steady the camera lens. He began snapping pictures of the iPad screen, capturing the fake account numbers, the routing details, and the contact information for the fictional bank manager. The dam had broken, and his greed was in complete control. I watched in cold disgust as he closed the email application and began frantically swiping through my private device. He opened my digital banking apps, my investment portfolios, and my personal text messages. He was searching for passwords, security questions, anything he could use to drain my assets dry. He photographed every single screen. He was moving with a terrifying, unhinged speed, his thumbs flying across the glass. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was not a banking error, and it was certainly not a concerned son-in-law trying to protect his family. The plausible lie was utterly dead. I was watching a calculated predatory invasion of privacy. I was watching a thief meticulously planning the destruction of my life's work. My hands tightened around the steering wheel until the leather creaked. I felt a deep sorrow for Brooke. She was upstairs washing her hair, completely oblivious to the fact that the man she loved was actively trying to rob her father blind. Derek thought he had hit the ultimate jackpot. He thought he had stumbled upon the key to solving his massive financial failures. He had no idea that every frantic swipe was being recorded and stored on a secure cloud server, building an impenetrable wall of evidence against him. After 5 minutes of frantic digital pillaging, the sound of the upstairs shower must have shut off. Derek froze. His head snapped up. He hastily closed all the applications on the iPad, returning it to the exact screen and position where I had left it. He dropped his phone back into his pocket, picked up his magazine, and leaned back against the sofa cushions, crossing his legs in a picture of relaxed leisure. He wiped a bead of nervous sweat from his brow, his eyes darting one last time toward the stairs, just to be absolutely certain he was safe. He took a deep breath, smoothing his hair and adjusting his collar, instantly transforming back into the perfect, supportive husband. I closed the application on my phone, plunging the screen into darkness. The silence inside my truck was absolute. I sat there for a few moments, letting the cold reality settle deep into my bones. The hunt was over. The trap had sprung and the rat was caught. I would not let him take away the life that Patty and I had built. This was my domain, and he had made a fatal miscalculation today. I now possessed the exact leverage I needed to completely destroy Derek Thorne and sever his parasitic hold on my daughter. I took a deep, steady breath, pushed open the heavy door, and began the short walk back to my house. The deception was finished, and the time for patience had passed. I was ready to tear down his illusion and show Brooke the truth. The morning after I watched my son-in-law try to steal my digital identity, I told Brooke and Derek I was going to the store. Instead, I drove my truck to a faded diner. I slid into a corner booth. 10 minutes later, Thomas pulled into the parking lot. He was a private investigator I had retained decades ago. He was a quiet man who possessed a talent for finding the dirt people buried deep underground. He slid into the booth across from me, placing a thick manila folder on the scratched Formica table. He did not bother with pleasantries. He just ordered a black coffee and looked at me with grim, tired eyes. "You were right to trust your gut on this one, Harrison," Thomas said. "I dug into Derek Thorne and his wealth management firm. The entire operation is a facade constructed of smoke and mirrors." I kept my hands resting flat on the table. "Tell me exactly what we are dealing with." Thomas opened the folder. He slid a grainy photograph of a strip mall across the table. Thorn Venture Capital does not exist. It is a rented post office box inside a shipping center. There is no corporate office. There is no board of directors. There is no massive portfolio of liquid assets. He is registered as a sole proprietor, but he has not filed a legitimate corporate tax return in over 3 years. I felt my jaw tighten. How is he affording the tailored suits and the leased sports cars? How did he manage to fool Brooke? Thomas slid another piece of paper toward me. 2 years ago, Derek actually had some money. He received a decent inheritance from his late grandfather. He poured every single penny of it into a massive cryptocurrency scheme. He thought he was going to become a billionaire overnight. Instead, the platform collapsed. He lost his entire inheritance in the span of 48 hours. My stomach twisted into a heavy knot. He lost everything, worse than everything. Thomas corrected, leaning forward. When he lost his inheritance, he tried to chase his losses. He started borrowing money to buy back into the market, hoping for a miraculous rebound. When the legitimate banks cut him off, he went to the shadow lenders. He currently owes just over $2 million to a very dangerous loan shark syndicate operating out of Chicago. I stared at the red numbers. The puzzle pieces slammed into place with sickening clarity. The desperate pacing in the alleyway. The sheer terror in his eyes when the tow truck driver threatened to return. The frantic attempt to break into my filing cabinet, and the joy on his face when he saw the fake email detailing a $7 million transfer. Derek was a dead man walking. The people he owed money to did not send angry letters. They sent men to break legs and burn down houses. "There is more, Harrison," Thomas said softly. "And this is the part that is going to make you want to kill him." Thomas pulled a final stack of papers from the folder. They were detailed transaction logs. I recognized the account name immediately. It was the commercial business account for Brooke's Floral Boutique. "I pulled the financial records for your daughter's shop." Thomas explained, his tone heavy with sympathy. When they got married, Derek convinced Brooke to let him handle the accounting. He told her it would take the stress off her shoulders. But he has not been managing her accounts. He has been systematically draining them. I picked up the papers, my hands trembling slightly. Every week for the past 8 months, Derek had been siphoning thousands of dollars out of Brooke's business account. He was routing the money through a maze of shell companies, desperately trying to scrape together enough cash to make the minimum monthly interest payments on his $2 million syndicate debt. He stopped paying her commercial leases 3 months ago. Thomas continued. That is why her delivery van was repossessed yesterday. He stopped paying her wholesale flower suppliers. He stopped paying the boutique's utility bills. Her business is completely insolvent, Harrison. She is operating on fumes. By the end of this month, the bank will freeze her accounts, and she will be forced into bankruptcy. The air in my lungs turned to ash. Brooke had built that boutique from nothing. She had spent countless nights awake at her kitchen table sketching floral arrangements and building a clientele. It was her dream, her pride and joy. And her husband was bleeding it dry behind her back to save his own miserable life. He was destroying her. He is using her as a human shield. I whispered, my voice sounding rough. He is drowning Harrison, Thomas said, pushing the folder toward me. And when a man like Derek starts to drown, he will pull down whoever is closest to him just to get another breath of air. He targeted you because you are his last resort. He saw your properties, and he thought he could manipulate you into signing over an asset. He needs a massive payout right now. If he does not get it, those loan sharks will come. I reached out and placed my hand over the manila folder. I felt a sudden profound calm wash over me. It was the same cold, calculating focus I used to feel when I was standing in the scrapyard, preparing to dismantle a massive, dangerous piece of machinery. There was no room for error. There was no room for hesitation. Every move had to be precise, deliberate, and devastating. Derek had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He had manipulated my daughter's heart. He had stolen her hard-earned money. He had brought the shadow of violent, dangerous criminals right to our doorstep. He had looked me in the eye, and smiled while he actively planned the destruction of my family. "Thank you, Thomas," I said, sliding the folder into my briefcase. "You did exceptional work. What are you going to do?" Harrison Thomas asked, watching me closely. "If you need me to contact the authorities, I have friends in the Financial Crimes Division. We can have him arrested for fraud before the end of the week." I shook my head slowly, finishing my coffee. "No. The authorities would just put him in a cell. That is too easy. That is an escape. If he goes to prison now, Brooke will think it is a mistake. She will think he was just a businessman who got in over his head. She will visit him. She will pity him. I need her to see exactly who he is. I need her to see the monster hiding behind the tailored suit." I slowly slid out of the booth and stood up, gripping the handle of my briefcase. I walked out of the diner and back to my old truck. I placed the folder on the empty passenger seat right next to the iPad that contained the video of Derek trying to rob me blind. The hunt was officially over. It was finally time for the execution. I pulled out of the diner parking lot and merged onto the interstate, heading straight for the busy downtown business district. The short drive took less than 20 minutes, but my mind frantically raced through 1,000 different scenarios. The manila folder and the silver iPad sat on my passenger seat like unexploded ordnance. I parked my old truck in the underground garage of a sleek glass high-rise and took the private elevator up to the 14th floor. Mitchell Gallagher had been my corporate attorney and trusted confidant for over 25 years. He was the man who navigated the complex legal waters when Patty and I first expanded our salvage operation into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Mitchell was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who believed in the absolute power of an ironclad contract. His secretary ushered me immediately into his spacious corner office. Mitchell stood up from behind his massive oak desk, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes, but his expression sobered the moment he saw my face. He knew me too well. He knew the difference between a social visit and a man preparing for war. "Sit down, Harrison," Mitchell said, gesturing to the heavy leather chairs opposite his desk. "You look like you are about to tear a building apart with your bare hands. What is going on?" I did not waste time with pleasantries. I opened my briefcase, took out the thick manila folder Thomas had given me, and placed it squarely on his pristine desk. Then I set the iPad right next to it, pulling up the hidden camera footage from my living room. "I want you to review these financial logs, Mitchell. And then I want you to watch this video," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Take your time. I will wait right here." Mitchell frowned, picking up the heavy folder. He adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and began to read. For the first few minutes, the only sound in the office was the steady ticking of his antique wall clock and the crisp rustle of turning pages. I watched his professional composure slowly crack. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed in sheer disbelief. When he reached the transaction logs detailing the systematic draining of Brooke's business account, he let out a low, harsh breath. He set the papers down and pressed play on the iPad screen. He watched the high-definition footage of my son-in-law, frantically photographing my fabricated banking details, swiping through my personal data like a desperate, starving scavenger. When the video ended, Mitchell pushed the tablet away as if it were contaminated. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking at me with an expression of profound, chilling gravity. "Harrison, this is absolutely catastrophic," Mitchell said, his voice dropping into a hushed, urgent register. "This man is not just a fraud. He is actively committing grand larceny against your daughter. He is attempting to breach your secure financial networks. And if what these investigative reports say about his $2 million debt to the Chicago syndicate is true, he is bringing incredibly dangerous, violent criminals directly into your family's orbit. We cannot wait a single second on this." Mitchell reached for his desk phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. "I am calling the Financial Crimes Division right now. I have a contact at the Federal Bureau who handles syndicate-related extortion and fraud. We hand over this folder, we hand over the video, and they will have Derek in handcuffs before dinner. We can freeze his assets, secure Brooks' remaining business capital, and get a protective order in place by tomorrow morning. Put the phone down, Mitchell, I said, my voice slicing through the quiet room like a razor. Mitchell froze, staring at me in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Harrison, did you not hear a word I just said? The man owes $2 million to literal loan sharks. He is bleeding Brooke completely dry. If he realizes the bank transfer he photographed on your tablet is a fake, he will panic. Desperate men do desperate, violent things. We have to bring the police into this immediately. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on his desk, locking my eyes with his. If we call the police right now, we lose everything, I stated, measuring every single syllable to ensure he understood the gravity of my choice. Mitchell looked utterly exasperated. How do you figure that? You have the evidence. You have him dead to rights. I have legal evidence, I replied, keeping my emotions tightly leashed. I do not have emotional evidence. You are a lawyer, Mitchell. You look at this entire situation through the rigid lens of a courtroom. I am looking at this through the eyes of a father. You know my daughter. You know how fiercely loyal she is. Derek has spent 2 entire years grooming her, isolating her, and convincing her that he is the perfect, devoted husband. He has completely manipulated her reality. I paused, letting the immense weight of my words settle heavily into the quiet room. If the police kick down their front door tonight and drag him away in handcuffs, what do you honestly think he is going to do? He is a masterful liar. He will spin a story so fast it will make your head spin. He will tell Brooke that I set him up because I never liked him. He will claim the iPad incident was just him trying to help me manage my complex accounts, and the missing money from her shop was a temporary investment strategy that accidentally went wrong. He will play the absolute victim. He will cry, he will beg, and he will convince her that her paranoid, controlling father framed him simply to ruin their marriage. Mitchell slowly lowered his hand from the black phone receiver. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair, his expression softening as the harsh reality of the psychological dynamic finally sank in. She would absolutely defend him, Mitchell murmured, shaking his head. She would defend him to her last breath. I confirmed, feeling a dull ache in my chest. She would pool whatever money she has left to hire him a costly defense attorney. She would turn her back on me, and he would use her blind loyalty to drag this out in the courts for years. He would drain her dry while fighting the charges, and I would lose my daughter forever. I cannot afford a partial victory. I promised Patty I would protect our girl, and throwing Derek in a cell while he still holds her heart is not protection. It is an absolute disaster. So what is your play? Harrison Mitchell asked, lacing his fingers together over his desk. I am going to build an inescapable trap, I said, my tone hardening. I am going to hand him the rope, and I am going to build the gallows right in my living room. Brooke needs to see his monstrosity with her own eyes. She needs to watch the mask fall off completely, leaving him exposed without room for manipulation. I left Mitchell Gallagher sitting silently behind his massive oak desk, still staring at the frozen iPad screen as if it were a highly venomous snake. The drive to the industrial zone felt like crossing into another world, thick with the smell of diesel exhaust and burning copper. This was the empire built on rust and sweat that Derek Thorne thought he could steal. I pulled my truck through the heavy chain-link gates of the primary salvage yard. The hydraulic crushers were deafening. I carefully parked near our main corrugated steel hub. Hector Morales was already waiting for me on the loading dock. Hector had been my warehouse manager for 22 years. He ran the operation with military precision. He did not ask questions as I led him inside the dusty back office. "Close the door, Hector," I said, tossing my briefcase onto the battered metal desk. "And turn off the main radio. I need absolute silence for this." Hector clicked the deadbolt into place. "Whatever you need, Mr. Caldwell. We are ready." I sat down in the creaky office chair and pulled out a stack of blank official company letterheads. The paper was thick, watermarked with the original logo Patty had proudly designed 30 years ago. I need us to manufacture a lie, Hector, I said. I need an inventory manifest that looks so highly classified, so undeniably lucrative, that a desperate man would risk federal prison to get his hands on it. Hector raised a dark, questioning eyebrow, but nodded slowly in agreement. What specific kind of inventory are we talking about? Platinum and pure rhodium, I replied firmly. The most untraceable high-yield salvage materials on the market. I took a slow, deep, and steadying breath. It was finally time to trap him. I spent the next 2 grueling hours with Hector meticulously crafting the perfect, inescapable decoy. We built a detailed logistical manifest. Hector dictated the exact chemical weights and extraction codes to make the document look flawlessly authentic. We created a fabricated paper trail detailing a massive off-the-books salvage operation involving decommissioned aerospace components and industrial catalytic converters. According to the document, my company had accumulated these precious metals over a decade. It stated the materials were unregistered and sitting off the grid. We placed the value at $15 million. And the location, Hector asked, pulling a heavy file from the storage cabinet. We list the storage location as Warehouse 42. I answered, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. The exact property he is already trying to force me to sell. It makes perfect sense. He will think I am hoarding the metals there, refusing to sell the land to avoid exposing the illegal stockpile. Hector printed the final document using the old dot matrix printer in the corner. The faded ink gave the manifest an aged, deeply confidential appearance. I took a red ink stamp from the top drawer and slammed it down across the top margin of the first page. Highly confidential, eyes only. I slid the documents into a worn manila envelope, tying the string closure in a specific knot I could recognize if tampered with. You be very careful with this, boss. Hector suddenly warned, his voice incredibly low and deadly serious as I walked toward the heavy door. $15 million in untraceable metal is definitely going to make him highly dangerous. A cornered, starving animal will absolutely bite. I know exactly how a cornered animal bites, Hector, I replied, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun. That is exactly why I am leading him straight into a cage. I drove back to the quiet, affluent suburbs. I parked my truck in the driveway and walked confidently through the front door. The house was quiet. Brooke had left a note on the kitchen counter saying she and Derek had gone to the boutique to deal with the tow truck agency and figure out their banking error. It gave me the perfect window of opportunity to set the stage, so I walked slowly down the long hallway and carefully unlocked the heavy mahogany door to my private study. Afternoon light cast long shadows across the floor. I walked over to the fireproof filing cabinet that Derek had picked open the previous night. I pulled the bottom drawer open. I did not hide the manila envelope at the very bottom. That would be too difficult to find. I needed him to see it almost immediately, but I needed him to think he was clever for discovering it. I strategically wedged the thick manila envelope halfway down between my legitimate tax returns and my original property deeds. I left the red confidential stamp just slightly exposed, catching the dim light in the drawer. It was an irresistible beacon for a man searching for salvation. I did not want him fumbling with tension wrenches again. I wanted him to slide it open and find his prize with agonizing ease. Next, I checked the hidden cameras I had installed. The tiny lens in the smoke detector had a perfect, unobstructed view of the filing cabinet. The digital clock on the bookshelf captured the doorway. Every square inch of the study was covered. I pulled out my phone and verified the live feed. The high-definition video was pristine, ready to record every single movement. I walked out of the study, leaving the door cracked open exactly 1.5 inches. It was a subtle invitation, a psychological lure designed to whisper to his paranoia and his greed. He would walk past that door tonight, he would see the sliver of darkness, and his addiction to the hunt would force him inside. I spent the remainder of the long evening playing the difficult role of the comforting, utterly oblivious father. When Brooke and Derek returned from the boutique, they looked utterly exhausted. Brooke's eyes were red from crying, and Derek maintained a facade of furious, righteous indignation about the incompetent banking system holding their funds hostage. I made dinner, offered encouraging words, and watched him perform. He was a spectacular liar, kissing my daughter's forehead and promising her that everything would be resolved by Monday. Beneath the glass table, his right knee bounced continuously with an erratic, wildly uncontrollable tremor. The $2 million syndicate debt was eating him alive from the inside out. He was running out of time, running out of lies, and running out of money. He needed a miracle. At exactly 10:30, they politely excused themselves to the guest suite. I retreated to my bedroom, leaving my door open just a fraction. I lay down on the mattress, fully clothed, holding my phone in the palm of my hand. The screen was dark, but the camera application was primed and ready. I did not have to wait until 2 in the morning this time. The desperation was accelerating. At exactly midnight, the floorboard in the upstairs hallway groaned. The soft padding sound of footsteps descended the staircase. I raised my phone, unlocking the screen, and tapped the live feed icon. The digital clock camera in the study flickered to life. The heavy mahogany door slowly, silently pushed open, casting a long shadow across the carpet. Derek Thorne stepped into the room, swallowed the bait, and sealed his own fate. The morning after Derek broke into my study, the atmosphere in the house was thick with an unspoken tension. At breakfast, Derek was practically vibrating with a manic, poorly concealed energy. He drank his coffee too fast, his eyes darting around the room, completely unable to sit still. He told Brooke they needed to head back to their townhouse, claiming the property management company had finally cleared the plumbing issue. Brooke looked relieved, completely unaware that her husband was actually rushing to execute a phantom heist. I helped them carry their bags to the driveway, playing the role of the sad, lonely father, saying goodbye to his beloved daughter. I hugged Brooke tightly, resting my chin on top of her head, breathing in her floral perfume. I promised her I would come down to the boutique later in the week. Then I turned to Derek. I shook his hand, wishing him luck with his venture capital meetings. As I handed him his heavy leather briefcase, my thumb brushed against the hidden magnetic lining of the side pocket. Earlier that morning, while he was in the shower, washing off the sweat of his midnight burglary, I had slipped a tiny state-of-the-art listening device deep into the seams of the leather. It was barely the size of a coin, equipped with a long-lasting battery and a cellular transmitter. I watched them pull out of the driveway, the taillights of his leased sports car fading into the distance. I did not go back inside the house. I walked straight to my old truck, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the secure audio application. The digital interface hummed to life, connecting to the transmitter buried in Derek's briefcase. For the first 20 minutes, I heard nothing but the ambient noise of the highway and the soft murmur of the radio. Then I heard the distinct sound of the passenger door opening and closing. He had dropped Brooke off at her flower shop. The moment she was out of the car, the entire audio landscape shifted. The radio was abruptly turned off. I could hear Derek breathing. It was heavy, ragged, and frantic, the sound of a man running out of oxygen. I heard the aggressive squeal of tires as he accelerated, driving erratically. A few minutes later, the car came to a sudden halt, the transmission grinding into park. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the headrest of my truck, and listened. I heard the rapid, erratic tapping of a phone keypad. The line rang 3 times before a voice answered. It was a low, gravelly voice, entirely devoid of warmth or professional courtesy. The voice simply said one word, speaking his name. Derek exhaled a shaky breath, his voice pitching high with an edge of absolute desperation. "Listen to me." He pleaded, the words spilling out of his mouth in a frantic rush. "I know the payment is late. I know we are past the grace period. But you have to listen to me right now. I just found the ultimate score. I have the solution to everything. It is bigger than anything we ever discussed." The gravelly voice on the other end cut through his panic like a blunt knife. "We are not interested in your empty promises, Thorne. We gave you 2 weeks to liquidate the wife's business assets. You missed the deadline. The boss is out of patience. You owe $2 million. You have 48 hours to deliver the cash, or we are sending a crew to your house to collect our payment in flesh. No, you do not understand. Derek yelled, his voice echoing sharply inside his car. I am not talking about the flower shop. That place is completely drained. There is nothing left to squeeze out of it. I am talking about $15 million in unregistered, untraceable industrial platinum. The line went dead silent for a moment. I could practically feel the heavy, dangerous shift in the atmosphere through the audio feed. Explain. The loan shark commanded, his tone suddenly sharp and attentive. Derek swallowed hard, his breathing shuddering into the microphone. My father-in-law. He is an old scrap metal hoarder. He owns a dozen industrial properties around the city. I thought he was just a clueless old man sitting on useless real estate. But I got into his private study last night. I found his confidential holding manifests. He has been stockpiling decommissioned aerospace components and catalytic converters off the books for a decade. He has a massive cache of pure platinum and rhodium sitting in a secure facility right outside the city limits. Warehouse 42. I saw the official paperwork with my own eyes. It is completely off the grid. The government does not know it exists. Are you telling me this old man is sitting on 15 million in raw metal and you can get to it? The loan shark asked, a predatory edge creeping into his voice. I can get you full access. Derek insisted, his words tripping over each other in his rush to save his own skin. He is old and trusting. He is practically begging me to manage his assets. Give me 3 days. Just give me 72 hours. I will get the keys to the warehouse. I will give you the exact coordinates, the security codes, and the layout. You send your crew in with transport trucks and you take the entire stockpile. We fence the metal, you take your 2 million, you take an extra million for the trouble, and I keep the rest. It is a clean, untraceable ghost job. There was another long, suffocating pause. I sat in my truck, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The leather groaned under the immense crushing pressure of my fingers. I was listening to the man who shared a bed with my daughter actively broker a massive criminal heist against my family. He was selling me out to violent thugs to save his own miserable life. 3 days. The loan shark finally agreed, his voice cold and menacing. You have 72 hours to deliver the warehouse access. If you are lying to us, Thorne, if this is another one of your pathetic delays, we are not just going to break your legs. We are going to take your wife. We know where her little boutique is. We know her routine. We will take her and we will make you watch what happens when you cross us. The air in my lungs turned to jagged glass. My heart hammered furiously against my ribs. I waited for Derek to defend his wife. I waited for him to tell the loan shark to leave Brooke out of this, to show a single shred of human decency. Derek let out a cold, cynical laugh. You can do whatever you want with her, he said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Give me the 3 days. I will get you the platinum, take your cut, and I am taking my share and catching the first flight to Dubai. I lowered my phone, letting the screen fade to black as the chilling echo of Derek's final sentence hung in the heavy air of my truck. He was willing to sacrifice his own wife. He was perfectly willing to hand Brooke over to violent, merciless loan sharks just to buy himself enough time to flee the country. A cold, dark fury wrapped around my heart, squeezing until my chest ached. I had suspected he was a greedy, manipulative coward, but hearing him casually discard my daughter's life like a piece of worthless trash stripped away any lingering shred of mercy I might have harbored. This was no longer just about protecting my financial assets or teaching an arrogant son-in-law a harsh lesson about respect. This was about completely eradicating a dangerous predator who had woven himself into the very fabric of my family. He had sealed his own fate with those callous words. I did not feel pity for him anymore. I only felt a deep, unwavering resolve to see my plan through to its devastating conclusion. Derek thought he possessed the upper hand. He genuinely believed he had outsmarted a clueless old scrap metal hoarder. He believed he was coordinating the perfect, untraceable heist that would wash away his massive debts and fund his luxurious escape to Dubai. He had swallowed the bait completely, taking the fabricated inventory manifest as absolute gospel. He was currently visualizing a vast hidden cache of gleaming platinum and raw rhodium, calculating the millions of dollars he was about to steal from under my nose. But Derek was a fool who relied on superficial assumptions. He saw a faded corporate logo and a dusty filing cabinet, and he concluded he knew the entire scope of my operations. He had no idea what Warehouse 42 actually represented. There was absolutely no scrap metal stored in that building. There was no secret stockpile of decommissioned aerospace components, and there was certainly no unregistered industrial platinum sitting on wooden pallets waiting to be fenced by a syndicate crew. The manifest I had left perfectly exposed in my study was a pure, unadulterated work of fiction. Warehouse 42 was empty of salvage, but it was far from abandoned. Exactly 5 years ago, the Industrial Zoning Board had quietly approached me with a highly lucrative, completely confidential proposition. My primary scrapyards were situated on prime, easily accessible industrial acreage, but Warehouse 42 was isolated, positioned at the very end of a dead-end service road, flanked by dense concrete barriers and an old, disused rail line. It was an eyesore to the public, but it was a tactical goldmine for anyone requiring absolute privacy and heavy security. I had leased the entire structure and the surrounding 3 acres to Federal Armored Transport. They are the premier logistics contractors responsible for managing and moving immense volumes of physical currency for the central banking system. From the outside, the facility looks exactly like a forgotten relic of a bygone industrial era. I intentionally kept the exterior aesthetic completely wretched. The corrugated steel roof is streaked with heavy rust, the massive sliding bay doors look warped and permanently jammed, and the perimeter chain-link fence is deliberately overgrown with thick, thorny weeds. It is a masterpiece of urban camouflage designed to make people look away. But the interior of Warehouse 42 is an entirely different reality. Behind those rusted steel doors lies a heavily fortified military-grade staging ground. The concrete walls were reinforced with thick steel plating capable of withstanding explosive breaches. The roof is monitored by thermal imaging drones, and the subterranean foundation is laced with seismic sensors. When the central banks move massive pallets of physical cash across the region, they do not just park armored trucks in standard commercial lots. They bring them into secure, impenetrable hubs to transfer loads and rotate heavily armed security personnel. The building is wired with a network of silent federal alarms that link directly to the regional law enforcement dispatch and the Federal Bureau. The main floor is crisscrossed with invisible motion lasers that activate the second the primary perimeter is breached. Furthermore, there is a permanent tactical unit of highly trained, heavily armed federal guards stationed inside the control room 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They do not carry standard sidearms. They carry military assault rifles, and they are authorized to use absolute lethal force against any unauthorized intruders attempting to access the currency vaults. I sat in the quiet cab of my truck, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face as I envisioned the magnificent disaster Derek was actively orchestrating. He was currently convincing a dangerous syndicate of violent loan sharks to mobilize a professional robbery crew. He was giving them stolen coordinates, promising them a soft target, guarded by an oblivious old man and a few rusty padlocks. He was preparing to lead heavily armed thugs directly into the jaws of a supreme federal stronghold. By breaking into Warehouse 42, Derek Thorne was not merely orchestrating a simple burglary. He was not just stealing from his wealthy father-in-law to cover his massive cryptocurrency losses. He was coordinating a direct aggressive assault on a highly classified Federal Reserve staging facility. The moment he and his hired muscle breached those rusted exterior doors, they would trigger the silent alarms. They would instantly face a barrage of motion lasers and a tactical team of federal guards who did not ask polite questions. Derek was about to commit a Class A federal felony. There would be no clever negotiations. There would be no smooth talking his way out of a holding cell, and there would be no high-priced defense attorney capable of rescuing him from the devastating weight of federal prosecution. The government does not negotiate with individuals who attempt to raid their central banking transport hubs. They bury them under decades of mandatory minimum sentences in maximum security penitentiaries. He wanted the ultimate score to secure his escape to Dubai, and instead I was handing him a one-way ticket to federal prison. He had callously decided to let my beloved daughter rot with her bankrupt flower shop, completely unconcerned about the emotional and financial devastation he was leaving in his wake. Now he would be the one rotting behind thick iron bars, surrounded by the very criminals he had foolishly tried to double-cross. The trap was flawlessly designed, absolutely inescapable, and primed to snap shut the very second he made his move. I turned the key in the ignition, listening to the steady, comforting rumble of my engine. I shifted the truck into drive and pulled slowly away from the curb. The countdown had officially begun. I had given him exactly 72 hours to hang himself. Every single piece was now perfectly arranged on the massive chessboard. I was going to thoroughly enjoy watching every last second of his spectacular and utterly undeniable downfall. He had dared to threaten my family, assuming I was weak and blind. He was about to learn that true power operates silently, striking only when victory is guaranteed. 72 hours passed with the agonizing slowness of a ticking bomb. During those 3 days, I watched Derek operate with a manic, terrifying efficiency. He spent hours locked in the guest room making hushed phone calls and finalizing the logistics of his massive betrayal. He fed Brooke a steady diet of charming lies, assuring her that his sudden late-night meetings were simply the final hurdles before a massive venture capital breakthrough. Brooke absorbed every word. That Friday night, Derek announced he had a mandatory after-hours dinner with an international investor. He kissed her cheek and drove away to coordinate a violent robbery. I waited exactly 2 hours after his departure. At 1:45, I walked into the living room, where Brooke was curled up on the sofa reading a book. I told her to put her coat on. I told her we needed to take a drive. She looked up at me, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. She gestured toward the grandfather clock in the hallway, pointing out the late hour, and protesting that she was already dressed for bed. I did not raise my voice, nor did I offer room for negotiation. I simply told her that I had found something belonging to her mother. Something deeply important regarding Patty and her old neighborhood, and I needed to show it to her right now. The mention of her mother was the only key capable of bypassing her resistance. Brooke sighed, setting her book aside with a mild groan of annoyance, and pulled a heavy wool coat over her shoulders. She followed me out to the driveway and climbed into the passenger seat of my heavy utility vehicle. The drive was cloaked in a thick, oppressive silence. Brooke stared out the window as we left the pristine lawns of our affluent suburb behind. The smooth asphalt of the residential streets gave way to the cracked roads of the industrial district. The bright streetlights faded, replaced by flickering lamps that cast a yellow glow over the decaying landscape. Brooke shifted uncomfortably in her leather seat. She asked where we were going, her annoyance morphing into a subtle anxiety. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. I told her to be patient. I told her that some truths could only be understood when viewed in the absolute dark. I navigated the labyrinth of abandoned factories with practiced ease. This was my territory, a world built on rust sweat and hard labor that Derek thought he could casually exploit. I turned down a narrow service road flanked by towering walls of corrugated metal and crumbling brick. I killed the headlights, letting the heavy vehicle roll silently through the dense shadows until we reached a secluded alleyway. I brought the vehicle to a halt and shifted the transmission into park. The engine idled with a steady hum, the only sound in the wasteland. Brooke peered out the window, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She looked at the massive, dilapidated structure looming directly across the street from our concealed vantage point. It was Warehouse 42. From our position in the dark alley, the building looked like a forgotten tomb. The exterior was streaked with decades of grime, the chain-link fences were choked with dead weeds, and the massive bay doors appeared rusted shut. Brooke turned to me, her face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. She demanded to know why I had brought her to a condemned scrapyard in the middle of the night. She asked what this could possibly have to do with her mother. I did not answer her immediately. I reached into my thick leather briefcase resting on the center console. I pulled out my silver iPad, the same device Derek had so eagerly photographed just 3 days prior. I tapped the screen, unlocking the device, and bypassed my personal email applications. I opened the encrypted software linked to the security network of Warehouse 42. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dark cabin of the vehicle with a stark bluish glow. I divided the screen into a 4-panel grid. 2 panels displayed the high-definition infrared exterior feeds covering the front gates and the loading dock. The other 2 panels showed the interior of the warehouse, revealing the pristine, brightly lit military-grade staging ground that Derek was entirely unaware of. I turned to my daughter, looking deeply into her confused, frightened eyes. I told her that the man she married was not a venture capitalist. I told her that his entire firm was a rented post office box, and that he had lost his entire inheritance in a catastrophic financial gamble. I watched the blood drain completely from her face as I calmly explained that her husband was currently $2 million in debt to a violent loan shark syndicate. I did not soften the blow. I told her that Derek had been systematically siphoning money from her floral boutique for the past 8 months, pushing her business toward a forced bankruptcy just to cover the minimum interest payments on his massive hidden debts. Brooke opened her mouth to speak, to deny everything I was saying, to defend the man she loved. But the words died in her throat. She could see the unwavering, absolute certainty in my eyes. She knew me well enough to understand that I would never manufacture a lie of this magnitude. I held the glowing iPad out toward her. My hand was perfectly steady. I told her that Derek had broken into my private study. I told her he had found a fabricated inventory manifest detailing $15 million in untraceable platinum stored inside the exact warehouse we were currently parked outside of. I explained that Derek had sold that fake information to his criminal creditors, brokering a heist to save his own life and secure a one-way ticket out of the country. Brooke stared at the screen, her breathing shallow and erratic. She looked back up at the rusted exterior of the building across the street, her mind desperately trying to reconcile the decaying facade with the high-tech, heavily armed reality displayed on the tablet. I told her that Warehouse 42 was not a scrapyard. I told her it was a highly classified federal armored transport hub used to stage central banking currency. I told her it was wired with silent federal alarms, motion lasers, and guarded by a tactical team armed with military assault rifles. I gently pressed the iPad into her trembling hands. I told her to watch the screen closely. I told her that the mandatory dinner meeting Derek claimed to be attending was actually a rendezvous with a violent robbery crew. I told her that within the next few minutes, she was going to watch her husband attempt to breach a federal stronghold. She was going to watch the illusion shatter, and she was going to finally see the true monster hiding behind the mask. I placed my hand gently over hers, offering silent comfort as we waited for the absolute devastation to begin. The trap was finally set. The silence inside the heavy utility vehicle was suffocating, thick with an unspoken dread that pressed down on us. Brooke sat frozen beside me in the passenger seat, her wide eyes locked onto the glowing screen of the silver iPad resting on the center console. She was holding her breath, silently praying to whatever God would listen, that I was just a crazy, paranoid old man making a terrible mistake. I could feel the minute, terrifying tremors radiating from her small hand, trapped tightly under mine. The sophisticated infrared cameras covering the desolate exterior of Warehouse 42 displayed a haunting, stark landscape painted entirely in shades of gray and stark white. The heavily rusted chain-link fence looked exactly like a solid wall of pale bones in the pristine digital feed. The agonizing minutes dragged by with a heavy leaden weight that made it incredibly difficult to breathe. Every single rhythmic tick of the digital dashboard clock felt like a brutal, physical blow directly to my chest. I knew precisely how desperately my beautiful daughter wanted me to be wrong tonight. She wanted the charming man she had married to be attending a late-night business dinner with wealthy international investors in a brightly lit upscale downtown restaurant. She desperately wanted her fragile dream to remain completely intact. But beautiful dreams, built on a rotten foundation of calculated endless lies, eventually collapse, and the inevitable collapse is never gentle or kind. I stared intently at the screen, my expression carved from solid stone, patiently waiting for the desperate rat to finally enter the concrete maze I had built. At exactly 12:14 in the morning, a pair of bright headlights suddenly swept across the cracked, uneven asphalt of the dark service road. Brooke let out a sharp, involuntary gasp of pure terror, her trembling fingers digging painfully into the soft leather of the armrest. A dark, unmarked cargo van rolled to a remarkably slow, menacing halt, just outside the visible radius of the primary streetlights. The suspicious vehicle was parked exactly 50 yards away from the heavy perimeter gates of the silent warehouse. The metal side door of the van slid open with a harsh scrape, and three distinct figures immediately emerged into the stark infrared glare of my hidden security network. They moved together with a highly predatory, synchronized, and chilling efficiency. Two of the men were massive, incredibly broad-shouldered thugs dressed head to toe in dark tactical combat gear. They casually carried heavy, unmistakable assault rifles slung menacingly across their broad chests. The third man was noticeably smaller, wearing a sleek, tailored, dark designer suit that looked entirely absurdly out of place in the desolate, ruined industrial wasteland. It was Derek. He was confidently holding a massive pair of heavy industrial bolt cutters gripped tightly in his right hand. Brooke physically recoiled in her passenger seat, pressing her back hard against the door. A strangled, agonizing, and broken sob violently ripped from her dry throat as she stared blankly at the high-definition video feed. There was absolutely no mistaken identity occurring here. There was no plausible, charming excuse left for him to utilize. The man she truly loved, the man who had solemnly promised to protect and cherish her forever, was standing in a deserted, filthy alleyway with dangerous armed mercenaries actively preparing to illegally break into a highly classified federal transport hub. I reached out and tapped the audio icon, located on the bottom corner of the iPad screen. I patched the sophisticated parabolic security microphones from the exterior warehouse cameras directly into the surround sound speakers of my parked vehicle. A low, hissing burst of electrical static briefly filled the dark cabin, quickly replaced by the crisp, terrifyingly clear audio transmitting from the deserted street outside. We could distinctly hear the heavy, aggressive crunch of loose gravel grinding beneath their thick combat boots. We could clearly hear the rhythmic metallic clinking of their heavy tactical gear shifting in the cold night air. And then we finally heard Derek's voice, completely stripped of his usual charming, highly polished, and manipulative cadence. He sounded incredibly frantic, overwhelmingly greedy, and utterly terrifyingly ruthless. "We are going to quickly cut the main steel chain on the front perimeter gate," Derek instructed the armed men, gesturing wildly toward the rusted, imposing entrance. "The old man is a complete, utter fool. He relies entirely on heavy steel padlocks and outdated deadbolts to protect his massive fortune. There are absolutely no exterior surveillance cameras and no electronic security measures installed anywhere on this outer boundary fence. Once we are safely inside the main concrete yard, I have the exact numerical combination required to open the secondary loading bay door." The massive loan shark towering ominously next to him let out a low, deeply menacing grunt, casually adjusting the heavy tactical rifle strapped securely across his chest. "We really better not be walking blindly into a stupid setup, Thorne." The dangerous thug growled, his rough voice a low, threatening, and violent rumble that vibrated intensely through the interior speakers of my truck. "If this massive building is actually empty, you are definitely not walking back out of this dark alleyway alive tonight." Derek scoffed loudly, letting out a cold, highly arrogant sound that made my devastated daughter physically flinch in her seat. "It is definitely not empty," Derek replied confidently, his rising tone dripping with sheer, unadulterated, and sickening greed. I saw the actual highly confidential inventory manifests with my own 2 eyes. The pure platinum is stacked right inside the primary holding bay. We will quickly load the heavy pallets directly into the back of the cargo van, and we will disappear completely before sunrise. The second armed thug stepped forward aggressively, resting a massive gloved hand heavily on the rusted chain-link fence. "And what exactly about your wife?" he asked casually, turning his head to look at Derek. "Are you absolutely sure she is not going to immediately file a missing persons report with the local police when you do not come home tonight? A massive police investigation is going to bring intense heat we really do not need right now." Derek did not even hesitate for a single fraction of a second. The ultimate betrayal flowed freely from his mouth with an effortless, breathtaking, and monstrous cruelty. "Once we grab the platinum, I am out." Derek stated firmly, his cold words echoing clearly through the dark cabin of my truck. "Block Brooke's number. She has absolutely no idea what is actually going on. Let the dumb broad rot with her bankrupt flower shop." The silence inside my vehicle was completely absolute, stunning, and profound. Brooke stared blankly at the screen, her beautiful face completely drained of color. The perfect illusion she had fiercely protected shattered instantly into a million irreparable pieces. She let out a long, agonizing wail, collapsing forward helplessly, her delicate shoulders trembling with violent, uncontrollable sobs. I immediately reached across the center console, wrapping my strong arms tightly around my devastated daughter. "I promised your mother I would never let a man destroy your life and get away with it," I whispered very fiercely. We sat in the suffocating darkness of the heavy utility vehicle. Brooke slowly pulled back from my chest. Her tears had stopped, replaced by a cold, hollow numbness that settled deeply into her eyes. She wiped her face with the back of her trembling hand and turned her gaze back to the glowing screen of the silver tablet, and then to the dilapidated structure looming across the street. We watched in absolute silence as the three men moved with calculated precision toward the primary entrance of Warehouse 42. Derek walked with a false, arrogant swagger, completely convinced of his own manufactured brilliance. The two massive mercenaries flanked him, their heavy tactical boots crunching softly against the gravel. Derek stopped at the main gate. The thick chain securing the rusted iron fence looked formidable, but it was nothing more than a fragile illusion. He raised the heavy industrial bolt cutters, locking the steel jaws around the center link of the chain. He leaned his entire body weight into the handles. A sharp metallic snap echoed through the silent alleyway, perfectly captured by the sensitive parabolic microphones, and broadcast directly into the cabin of my truck. The severed chain fell heavily to the dirt. Derek pushed the iron gate open. It protested with a long, agonizing screech of ungreased hinges. The armed thugs scanned the deserted perimeter, their assault rifles raised, completely unaware that multiple high-definition thermal cameras were currently tracking their every single heartbeat. They crossed the 50 yards of cracked, weed-choked concrete. Derek led the way toward the massive, corrugated loading bay door. This was the exact spot he believed held his ultimate salvation. He pulled his smartphone from his tailored suit pocket. I knew exactly what he was looking at. He was reviewing the photographs he had stolen from my study, staring at the fabricated access codes I had specifically designed for him. He approached the rusted keypad mounted on the brick wall beside the door. He punched in the numerical sequence with eager, trembling fingers. A heavy hydraulic clunk reverberated from deep within the belly of the building. The massive steel door slowly began to roll upward on its thick industrial tracks, grinding against the concrete. Derek took a confident step forward, a victorious smile spreading across his face. He was fully expecting to walk into a dark, quiet room overflowing with wooden pallets of raw platinum and untraceable rhodium. He expected to find his freedom. He stepped across the threshold, his expensive leather shoes crossing the invisible plane of the motion lasers. The response was absolutely instantaneous and completely devastating. The trap did not just spring, it violently exploded. Before Derek could even take a second step, Massive banks of military-grade floodlights ignited simultaneously across the entire perimeter of the yard. The sudden intense brilliance turned the pitch-black night into an artificial blinding daylight. The light was so fierce and aggressive that Brooke and I had to physically shield our eyes. A split second later, the deafening, bone-rattling wail of a federal emergency siren erupted from the rooftop of the warehouse. The sound was a physical force, a terrifying rhythmic shriek designed to disorient and paralyze. On the security screen, Derek froze. His victorious smile vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. He dropped his smartphone to the concrete, raising his arms to shield his eyes from the blinding glare. The two hardened mercenaries behind him instinctively raised their assault rifles, their tactical training kicking in as they desperately searched for targets in the chaotic light. But their criminal experience also allowed them to immediately recognize the terrifying reality of their situation. This was not a poorly guarded scrapyard. They had walked blindly into a highly fortified federal stronghold. Heavy steel tactical doors swung open on all sides of the warehouse yard. Dozens of highly trained, heavily armored federal guards poured out into the glaring light. They moved with terrifying speed and absolute military precision, forming a tight, inescapable perimeter around the three intruders. They did not carry standard sidearms. They carried high-powered, short-barreled assault rifles, and every single weapon was raised and locked firmly onto their targets. A booming, amplified voice echoed through a heavy loudspeaker, cutting cleanly through the wailing siren. Federal Armored Transport. Drop your weapons immediately, or you will be shot. Do it now. The mercenaries were violent men, but they were not suicidal. They instantly realized they were vastly outgunned and hopelessly outmaneuvered by federal authorities. Without a single moment of hesitation, they dropped their heavy rifles. They let their weapons fall onto the concrete, interlaced their fingers behind their heads, and slowly dropped to their knees. They knew the penalty for threatening a federal transport guard was a guaranteed death sentence. Derek, however, completely unraveled. The polished, manipulative venture capitalist simply ceased to exist. The man who had callously planned to abandon his wife to violent loan sharks was instantly reduced to a pathetic, terrified shell. He dropped the heavy bolt cutters, the tool clattering loudly against the pavement. He did not simply kneel. His legs gave out completely. He collapsed onto the cold, hard ground, falling directly into a shallow puddle of muddy water. Dozens of glowing red laser sights instantly tracked across his chest, dancing wildly over the lapels of his expensive designer suit. He threw his hands into the air, his body shaking with violent tremors. He began to cry. It was not a quiet, dignified surrender. It was a loud, hysterical, and embarrassing wail of absolute terror. Through the high-definition audio feed, Brooke and I could hear him frantically begging for his life, screaming that it was all a terrible mistake, that he was just a businessman looking for his father-in-law. The federal guards ignored his pathetic pleas. 4 heavily armored officers moved in rapidly, kicking Derek flat onto his stomach in the mud. They wrenched his arms violently behind his back, securing his wrists with heavy steel handcuffs. I watched the dark spreading stain forming on the front of his tailored trousers. In the face of actual immediate consequence, Derek Thorne had lost complete control of his bodily functions. He had literally wet himself in the mud, crying like a frightened child, while federal agents stripped him of his freedom. I turned slightly to look at my daughter. Brooke was staring intently at the iPad screen, completely mesmerized by the pathetic, humiliating spectacle unfolding on the concrete. There was no pity left in her eyes. There was no lingering trace of love or affection for the man begging in the mud. The calculated illusion he had so carefully maintained for 2 years was permanently, irreparably shattered. She was finally seeing the miserable, cowardly reality of the man who had promised to cherish her forever. Brooke slowly reached over and closed the protective cover of the iPad, shutting off the video feed. She let out a long, heavy breath, releasing the immense burden she had been unknowingly carrying for years. She looked at me, her beautiful face illuminated by the distant glow of the warehouse floodlights. Her eyes were now completely clear. The morning sun cast a long, pale golden light across the polished granite countertops of my kitchen. The house was profoundly quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic, terrifying symphony of federal sirens and screaming mercenaries that had dominated the previous night. I stood by the coffee maker listening to the rhythmic, comforting drip of the dark liquid filling the glass carafe. Brooke sat silently at the kitchen island, her hands wrapped tightly around a warm ceramic mug. She was pale and visibly exhausted, but the agonizing tension that had gripped her shoulders for 2 long years was completely gone. The devastating illusion of her perfect marriage had been brutally ripped away, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. We had not spoken much since returning from the industrial district. There was no need for grand speeches or emotional declarations. She had witnessed the absolute truth with her own 2 eyes, and that truth had irrevocably severed the toxic chains Derek had wrapped around her life. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, savoring the bitter, earthy aroma, and turned to face my daughter. I was just about to ask her what she wanted for breakfast when her mobile phone shattered the peaceful silence. The device vibrated aggressively against the solid granite, the harsh electronic ringtone echoing sharply in the quiet kitchen. Brooke flinched slightly, her eyes darting to the glowing screen. She stared at the unknown out-of-state number flashing relentlessly. A sudden, deep apprehension clouded her features. She slowly reached out and pressed the green button, sliding her thumb across the glass to answer the call. She placed the phone on speaker, laying it flat on the counter between us. A cold, automated, and entirely emotionless voice filled the room. "This is a collect call from the County Correctional Facility. An inmate has requested to speak with you. If you wish to accept the charges, press 1 now." Brooke looked up at me, her eyes wide and searching. I gave her a single firm nod. She pressed the number 1 on her keypad. The automated voice clicked off immediately, replaced by the frantic, echoing sounds of a crowded holding block. And then we heard Derek. "Brooke, please tell me you are there." His voice was a high, pathetic, and agonizingly desperate whine. He was sobbing uncontrollably, his words tripping over each other in a rushed, terrified frenzy. "You have to listen to me. There has been a massive, terrible misunderstanding. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was just driving past your father's old warehouse, and these armed men jumped out of nowhere. The police arrested me by mistake. They have me locked in a cell with violent criminals, Brooke. It is terrifying in here. You have to call my lawyer right now. You have to drain the business accounts and post my bail immediately. They are talking about federal charges, but it is all a complete lie. You have to get me out of here today." I listened to the pathetic, sniveling coward pouring his fabricated lies through the speaker. Even now, trapped behind solid steel bars and facing decades of incarceration, he was still attempting to manipulate his wife. He was still desperately trying to use her as a convenient shield to escape the devastating consequences of his own boundless greed. He had spent the previous night casually plotting to hand her over to ruthless loan sharks, and now he was begging her to empty her struggling flower shop accounts to purchase his freedom. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his narcissism was almost breathtaking. I watched Brooke carefully. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but her expression did not soften with pity. Her face hardened into a mask of pure, undeniable revulsion. She opened her mouth to reply, to unleash the righteous fury she had every right to express, but I gently placed my hand over hers. I shook my head slowly. This was not her burden to carry anymore. The final execution belonged entirely to me. I picked up the phone from the granite counter, lifting it to my ear. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cold, unwavering resolve settle completely into my voice. "Hello, Derek," I said, my tone as flat and unforgiving as a slab of solid concrete. The frantic, pathetic sobbing on the other end of the line ceased instantly. The silence that followed was so profound, I could practically hear his racing heartbeat through the digital connection. When he finally spoke, his voice was nothing more than a terrified, trembling whisper. Harrison. He breathed the realization striking him with the force of a physical blow. Where is Brooke? Why do you have her phone? I want to speak to my wife immediately. Brooke is sitting right beside me. I replied calmly, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee. And she has absolutely nothing to say to you. She is completely finished listening to your endless, pathetic lies. We had a very illuminating evening together, Derek. We took a lovely scenic drive down to the industrial district. We parked in a dark alleyway across from a certain dilapidated building, and we watched a highly entertaining show unfold on my security feed. We watched you confidently attempt to break into a federal transport hub, and we watched you cry like a terrified child when the tactical guards put you face down in the mud. There was a sharp, strangled intake of breath from the other side of the line. You were there. Derek choked out, his voice thick with rising panic. You set me up. You faked that entire inventory manifest. You deliberately led me straight into a trap. I did not set you up, Derek. I corrected smoothly, feeling a deep, satisfying warmth spread through my chest. I simply presented you with a beautifully crafted mirror, and you eagerly showed me the monstrous reflection of your own bottomless greed. You wanted to steal my legacy. You wanted to sacrifice my daughter to violent criminals just to secure your own cowardly escape. You wanted my warehouse son, you got it. But you did not break into a clueless old man's abandoned scrapyard. You did not find $15 million in unregistered platinum waiting to be stolen. You broke directly into a highly classified federal cash staging facility. You coordinated an armed assault on a United States banking transport stronghold. The men you brought with you were carrying illegal assault rifles. You triggered a Level 4 federal response. Harrison, please. Derek begged, his voice completely shattering into high, hysterical sobs. You have to tell them the absolute truth. You have to help me now. I laughed, a low, cold sound, holding absolutely no trace of humor. I am not going to help you, Derek, I stated firmly. Enjoy your 25-year federal sentence without parole. You are a ghost to us. Derek screamed in absolute despair. I pressed the red button, cutting him off completely, and permanently blocked the number. The bright morning sun was shining perfectly. The nightmare was truly over, and our entire family was finally safe and completely free. Exactly 1 entire month after that unforgettable night, the oppressive clouds that had choked our family finally parted. Derek was sitting in a cold isolation cell inside a maximum security federal detention center, awaiting a highly publicized federal trial. The ruthless syndicate loan sharks he had brazenly attempted to double-cross were indicted right alongside him. A federal judge had taken one look at the overwhelming mountain of evidence and immediately denied Derek any possibility of bail, officially declaring him an extreme flight risk. He was going absolutely nowhere. He would eventually trade his tailored designer suits for a bright orange jumpsuit, and the man who once believed he was untouchable would soon become nothing more than a forgotten prisoner serving a devastating sentence. On a remarkably beautiful Thursday morning, I drove my daughter into the bustling heart of the city. Brooke sat comfortably in the passenger seat of my heavy utility vehicle. Her complexion was completely restored. Her posture radiated a quiet, undeniable strength, and the dark, heavy circles under her beautiful eyes had entirely vanished. The divorce proceedings were already moving forward, with an incredible swiftness surgically excising Derek from her life permanently. We parked outside a towering glass structure and rode a silent elevator directly to the prestigious top floor. Mitchell Gallagher, my most trusted corporate attorney and a fierce loyalist to my family, was waiting patiently for us inside his expansive corner office. Brooke took a seat in a plush leather armchair, casting a curious, questioning glance in my direction. I walked slowly across the expensive carpet and sat directly beside her. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I opened it and placed a single heavy brass key squarely onto the polished mahogany desk between us. Brooke stared at the ornate key, completely bewildered. She asked what it was, for her voice echoing softly in the quiet room. I smiled warmly, reaching out to gently cover her hand with mine. I told her that a man who spends his entire life building a massive empire from jagged scrap metal learns to hide his most precious treasures where absolutely no one will ever look. I explained that Derek had foolishly believed my wealth was locked away inside a rusted warehouse or sitting exposed in vulnerable personal bank accounts. But Derek was a remarkably superficial creature who never understood the profound depths of a father's protective instincts. I nodded toward Mitchell, who handed Brooke a thick, leather-bound portfolio. I told her to open it. Her trembling fingers turned the crisp, heavy pages. She stared at the complex legal documents, struggling to process the massive figures printed in bold, black ink. I explained that years ago, shortly before her mother passed away, we had quietly established an impenetrable blind trust exclusively in her name. The real wealth, the massive culmination of my life's hardest work, was completely legally insulated. It was protected by layers of ironclad corporate law and entirely untouchable by any greedy, manipulative spouses. The brass key unlocked a private vault containing the physical bearer bonds and certified asset deeds that belonged solely to her. Derek had spent 2 years hunting for a hidden fortune that he literally never had the legal clearance to touch. Tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude spilled freely down Brooke's cheeks. She stood up abruptly, wrapping her arms tightly around my neck, burying her face into my shoulder. I held her close, feeling the incredible, undeniable bond between a father and his beloved daughter restored completely. She thanked me endlessly, but I told her that protecting her was the greatest privilege of my entire life. Later that week, Brooke officially reopened her floral boutique. With the heavy, suffocating anchor of Derek's secret financial drain permanently removed, the business began to flourish immediately. She hired 2 new assistants to manage the overflowing customer orders, and her vibrant, joyous laughter echoed through the fragrant, colorful shop once again. She was finally reclaiming her independence. That Sunday evening, I sat alone on the sturdy wooden porch of my quiet house. The late afternoon sun hung low on the distant horizon, casting a warm, brilliant golden glow across the manicured green lawn. I held a crystal glass filled with rich amber bourbon. The air was incredibly peaceful, devoid of the chaotic tension that had previously poisoned our lives. I took a slow sip of the smooth, burning liquid, letting the comforting warmth spread deep into my chest. I looked up at the vast, beautiful expanse of the painted sky, feeling a profound presence settling softly over me. I smiled, raising my glass in a silent, solemn toast. I kept my promise, Patty. I whispered to the gentle wind, my voice thick with unshakable conviction. Nobody takes what is ours. Greed is a blinding poison, making arrogant men believe they are smarter than everyone else. When you exploit the pure love of a family to line your pockets, you inevitably build your own inescapable cage. True wealth is not found in secret warehouses, stolen accounts, or fabricated lies. It is forged through decades of honest sweat, fierce loyalty, and the unwavering instinct of a father defending his own. Never underestimate a quiet man who spent his entire life building a massive empire from simple scrap. He knows exactly how to dispose of the trash that threatens his beautiful, beloved family. If this story proved that karma always comes to collect, smash that like button. Have you ever had to deal with a toxic partner or a greedy person trying to ruin your family? Share your experiences in the comments below, and please subscribe for more incredibly powerful daily life stories.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my Father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my Father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.